755 East 80th Street. 755 East 80th Street, type it over. He's hiding in the doorway across the street. The court branch.
KCF 15. Okay. The guy's all about.
Yep, 10-4.
If you're watching this video, whether you're an experienced pilot or new to the industry, you probably realize by now that there's more to flying your drone legally than looking at the FAA guidelines, setting up in a parking lot and taking off into the sky. What about state regulations? Is there any restricted airspace around? What about local ordinances? Are the local police going to show up? Park ranger? Well, in this video, I'm actually going to go through a real-world experience when I wanted to go on vacation in an area that I never flew in before. I'm going to go step by step on how I researched how I got my answers, so I was fairly confident that I was going to be able to fly legally once I got there. And I knew what footage I was going to be looking for once I showed up. Now, if you came here for an easy answer, this is what you have to do, A, B, C, 2 minutes and you're done. Sorry, you're probably not going to like the answer. Hi, this is Keith with Alien Drones. Thanks for stopping by the channel. I always appreciate it. It's good to see you. So if you're new to the channel, I do mostly drone tech, photography, tips and tutorials, and new product reviews related to drones and photography mostly. So if this is something that might interest you, consider hitting the subscribe and also the notify bell, and that will let you know if there is a new video available that may be of interest to you. So as I mentioned, in this video, I am going to go through my experience in actually finding out how to fly my drone legally. Now there is, again, as I mentioned, more to it than simply following the FAA guidelines, looking on Airmap or looking on Before You Fly, and finding out if there is a restricted airspace with regard to what the FAA says. There's a lot of local regulations. Different states, different municipalities have different rules and regulations on drones, and you might find that you think you're in good shape, and the police are actually going to show up. So believe it or not, local police and park rangers, for instance, have the authority to actually give you a ticket for doing something wrong. And not only can they give you a local ticket, they actually are in cooperation with the FAA to refer incidents which they figure are beyond their jurisdiction but might fall into the FAA's jurisdiction for further prosecution at a federal level. So this is important stuff. And what I'm going to do is go through an experience that I had, and how this started was I was going to take a few weeks and go to California. I love to surf, love to get out, and I wanted to go to a new place and fly the Mavic. I'm going to run through the steps that I took and show how things unfolded as I sequentially went through the different things. So first, of course, when you start looking at where you're going to fly your drone, the FAA and the federal guidelines are actually going to be one of the most important factors. If you can't fly because of a federal rule or an FAA guideline or a restriction, you're pretty much done. That is going to be the top level of the authority. Then we're going to run through some actual state laws, and they are going to vary. And then I'm actually going to peck into the local ordinances a little bit. So let's start with the FAA. So I was going to California, going to run to San Clemente, California. And first I wanted to find out if there was any restricted airspace that I really needed to worry about. So I'm going to open Airmap. However, you can use any of the FAA authorized type applications, whether it's Before You Fly, things like that. So first I'm going to actually go to San Clemente, which is where I was going to be going. And here we are. Okay, so first things first, we're going to find out if there's any major FAA restrictions which are going to prevent us from actually flying there. So right away we noticed that just south of San Clemente, there's going to be a huge area which is going to be completely restricted. And we have a military base, Camp Pendleton, which is just going to be the South San Diego area. So we know we're going to have to stay north of this area. So this is for the FAA. So this is going to be a controlled airspace. So let's zoom in on this just a little bit here. So I know, for instance, we're going to be up a little farther north. So it looks like, according to the FAA here, we're okay with having controlled airspace where I actually want to take off. So the reason I know, I do see this pier standing out here, and I know I want to fly this pier and see what's actually going on there. So as we're zoomed in on this area, we notice that there's no advisories now. So one thing we do have to be careful of, if a local temporary flight restriction comes up from whether a fire or a responder for some emergency, we have to make sure that if things change, we don't just plod in there blindly. So I would suggest right before you're getting ready to fly, you would check to make sure no temporary flight restrictions have popped up. Our FAA rules and regulations are out of the way. This is where a lot of people stop and they actually start flying. Now, we may be okay, but we may have a local regulation. So once we looked at Airmap and we found that there's nothing in the airspace, we know that we fundamentally can fly in that airspace. However, we still have to follow the FAA rules. And of course, that video is up here, and actually what the specific FAA rules are, and I'm not going to go through them in this video again. Take some time, just go through that video, and it will go through the FAA rules that you have to follow while you're navigating the airspace. Now, one thing that really helped us from the FAA is a government regulation that was reaffirmed in 2018 by the Trump administration, where they actually said that the FAA has the exclusive authority to regulate aviation safety and efficiency of the navigable airspace. Now, why this is important is because up to this point, local municipalities started passing their own laws with regard to airspace. What this means is you might not be able to fly over an airspace by your neighbor, by a city building, by a parking lot, by a city-owned restroom, and you would have no idea. And the airspace, you would have no way to identify what those specifics are, because everybody would have their own ordinances from county to county, from city to city, from district to district. And you could be flying through the air and realize you're going in and out of some controlled airspace, not from the FAA, but from a local ordinance. So the Congress actually stated that the FAA has exclusive rights to the airspace, which is awesome because that lets us know if we are following the FAA guidelines and the rules and regulations that are put forth by the FAA, we know that in the airspace, we are good to fly. Now that's really, really a good thing. However, that does not regulate where you can take off, land, and operate the controls for flying your drone. So what we're going to be doing now is, now we know we have the airspace covered because we did look up on the Airmap that we're okay in this airspace. However, let's now get into where we can actually take off and land. And so let's go to the next step. So I started looking for state laws in California that would apply to drones. So the first thing I came across is the Unmanned Aircraft System in State Parks document from the California Department of Parks and Recreation. So as I browsed through this, I looked and it said specifically drones are currently allowed in state parks, state beaches, state historic parks, and you can read the rest. But boy, it is actually allowed. So I was really excited. No worries about state parks, can take right off from those. And no hassles there. So no problems from the park rangers. I can take off. I have this document. And that's one thing I would do, is keep this document in your possession while you're flying in case somebody comes up to you. Again, if you're having to argue with the police, you're probably going to lose regardless if it's on your side or not. Don't argue with that. However, at least it gives you peace of mind. You tried to do your due diligence, right? So the next thing I looked, as I saw, well, it does talk about wilderness areas, natural preserves, and cultural preserves, which is fair enough. However, then there was this little note here that talks about checking with your local district before operating. It may have its own posted orders. So if the state parks are legal to fly in, except each state park may do its own regulation, I have to look even closer and drill down into the San Clemente area and find out where the state parks are in that area that I may be taking off from, and find out what those regulations are. So digging a little deeper, I found that along this coast in California, it's actually called the Orange Coast District. So I did find a document that talks about the state parks in the Orange Coast District specifically. So this one, now you can tell, is a little more anti-drone. So what they've said here is UAVs are an emergent technology that can have a negative impact. Right away we know we're in trouble, right? When they start the paragraph by saying, oh, drones are bad news, they have a negative impact, we know it's not going to be good. So it has a negative impact on park resources, public safety, and generally inconsistent with the park experience. I bet these guys had the same problem with the horseless carriage. Just saying. Due to the dramatic growth and popularity of model aircraft and UAS with the Orange Coast District and the resource public safety, blah, 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 the restrictions are as follows. No person shall launch, land, or operate a model aircraft within any park in the Orange Coast District. Balsa Chica State Beach, Huntington State Beach, Corona Del Mar State Beach, Crystal Cove, Tahaney State Beach, San Clemente State Beach. San Clemente sounds like something that may affect us here. Exceptions to this directive may include but are not limited to commercial, scientific, other exempting. Oh geez. So this is 7 of 2019. So this is only a couple months before I'm going to be in the area. Not good. So now I see we have to look at San Clemente State Beach. Where does this start? Where does this stop? Because we can't take off or land in these areas. So let's pull that up. So to do this, we're going to actually pull up Google Earth, which is really cool. If you haven't used Google Earth, give that a try. It is really pretty cool. So sure enough, here we are, San Clemente State Park, and here we go. We're going to zoom in this even a little more, see if we can find that pier that I wanted to fly. And sure enough, right here's the pier. Here's San Clemente State Beach, so you can see this state beach, and maybe it's a little harder to see in this particular view here, but here's the pier that I wanted to take off in, and here is the state beach here. And if we go up the way here, here is some more area here that we're going to have to stay out of. This is going to be Tahaney State Beach. If I'm saying that wrong, please let me know. But for the purposes of this discussion, we realize that we're going to have a problem taking off and landing there. Again, for now, flying in that airspace is okay, but just taking off and landing is going to be restricted, so we have to make sure we don't pilot a drone from there. So here we are. So we're in really good shape here as well. So we've dug in. Look at that. So if I'm down here by this pier, you know what? State Park isn't there. I'm just going to plop my butt right here on this pier, and I'm going to sit right at the base of this pier because look, we don't have any FAA regulations in our way. Airspace is open. We don't have any state park issues in our way, so we've got the federal and the state out of the way. So there should be nothing preventing me from actually flying this pier. But we haven't searched our local regulations yet. So let's go search the local regulations from San Clemente and see if there's anything that I need to worry about from a local level. Remember, the police can still give us a ticket up to thousands of dollars in fines and jail time. So we want to make sure that we respect the local ordinances as well. Even though they can't legally restrict the airspace, they can restrict the takeoff and landing. So I actually went to the San Clemente website, and they did say they had an issue with some drones in certain areas. Of course, I don't know where that is. Give some of the rules and regulations that are going to be required. So I started going through these regulations, and you can see these are ordinance numbers here. And I got down and I talked about a visual line of sight and 25 feet of another individual. Seems fair, no problem there. And then I got to see, no person shall take off, land, or operate a UA on or over private property without the written or electronic consent of the property owner, if the property owner is a person other than the UA operator. When the consent to operate UA is required to take off, land, or operate a UA on or over private property, UA operators must have in their possession a copy of the written or electronic consent from the owner of the properties over which they take off, land, or operate a UA. No way. This is not cool. I know that the city of San Clemente cannot have an ordinance that prevents me from flying over private property. Congress has provided the FAA with exclusive authority. Cities and municipalities are not permitted to have their own rules or regulations governing the operation of an aircraft. So that is not true. FAA can only do this. Now, I was concerned about it. Maybe I was misunderstanding something and there was some uniqueness to this area. So I contacted the FAA directly. So I'll show you the email that I actually sent to the FAA to clarify this matter. And it says, I'm planning to pilot a UAV in the near future in the area of California and researching the local ordinance of the city. It states, and I took this directly from the San Clemente ordinance, no person shall take off, land, or operate a UAA on or over private property without the written or electronic consent of the property owner. I continued by saying the way I understand the FAA law, the municipality cannot restrict the airspace by stating that no person may operate over private property. I am Part 107. I understand taking off or landing. However, I'm confused that the municipality can regulate airspace. Can you clarify? So quickly, I did receive a response from the FAA, and it said, Keith, thank you for contacting us. You are correct. Local municipalities can regulate the launch, landing, recovery, and manipulation of the controls on the ground. So the requirement of obtaining property owner consent to take off, land, or operate on private property is valid. However, quote, the require owner consent to operate a UA over private property part is beyond the scope of the authority. Airspace is considered public use and is exclusively regulated by the FAA. If you have any further questions, please let us know. So I was correct. Now, this being said, even though the municipality cannot regulate the airspace, I contacted them again. And I talked to a gentleman actually at the city and said, how can you regulate the airspace? According to the FAA, you cannot do that. And their response was, we are not attempting to regulate the airspace, but you cannot operate the controls over private property. Not fly your UAV, but operate the controls. So they said on or over. And the way I take this is they're trying to be purposely deceitful. So when somebody looks into flying your drone in San Clemente, they will scare you from doing it that you cannot fly over private property. So I believe it's probably purposely deceitful just to try to keep people from launching because they're too scared, because it says you can't fly over or private property. They must know what they're doing. I don't want to have a problem with the local police. But that is not the case. They said it is only operating the controls over. So don't lean over the private property when you're operating the controls with the remote, and you'll be fine. So since we know now that San Clemente does have some areas which they will not allow you to operate your remote, we do have to find out what those are to make sure that when we pull up in a parking lot or along a road that we're not standing in an area which they're going to actually send the local police and give us a ticket. We don't want to have that. So I contacted the city for specific information, and they did send me a few documents and directed me towards a website which has some of this information. So here's one of the documents that they sent me, and they said these are the areas where you cannot, they said operate, no-fly zone areas, of course. Now, take off, land, or operate is not true, we know that, but operating the controls, taking off or land is valid. So we can certainly fly by most of these with the exceptions of prisons and such. However, these are some areas where we certainly don't want to pull in a parking lot and take off because we're going to have an issue. It is specific to their ordinance. So the ones that were close to where we're going to be taking off are down here. You're talking about Linda Lane, talking these restrooms in here, base of the pier restrooms. This is all the pier that we were talking about taking off from. And this is an actual map of where they restricted the operation of the controls in the San Clemente area. So again, we want to be focusing on the pier area because that's where we decided we're going to fly. So here we are, and here's the pier going out into the water, and look at that. They did restrict by local ordinance that we cannot take off or land from this area. They have a 500-foot buffer around these, so a 250-foot radius, 500-foot diameter. We were thinking about taking off the pier. No can do. We know we have a state park right down in this area. We can't take off from there. However, I want to fly this pier. Don't know why. It's just something sticking out in the water, but I want to be able to do it, and I want to do it legally. So, looks to me if we go down here far enough, down past these Linda Lane here, looks like we can probably fly from there, keep our visual line of sight, and fly down to this pier and in the ocean along there, and then up the beach as well. So if we go into our friend Google Earth again, and we look at where we are, here's the pier. This I know is the building, and there is a pier restroom, another building in here. This is the Linda Lane end here that we just saw in this other map here. So if we were right down in this area, I think we can take off and actually get down to this pier. So that's exactly what I did. When I got to the area, we drove up, actually figured out where we were, and boy, look at that. We came right in here. This guy wasn't there, by the way. However, we went right down in here, went down in the corner, went down a little ways here, so we knew we were far enough away from the ordnance area that restricted us. And look at that, there's the pier. We can still keep our UAV within a visual line of sight. Go up along the tracks here. Really nice. So not only can we fly the beach here, maybe get some footage of some of the surfers that are along the beach, go along the pier. So according to the FAA, we're good. Controlled airspace, we're good. Local ordinances, we're good for taking off and landing. We are good to go. So we have a spot, and we're actually going to be able to take off from here legally. Now, does that mean that somebody's still not going to come and harass you and say that you can't fly here? It's possible. But you will have done your research. You will have done your due diligence. So you will be as confident as you can. Yes, I have done my due diligence. I've done my homework to try to do the best I can. Will it be perfect? Not necessarily so. But you know you've went through the federal guidelines. We've checked for controlled airspace. We've checked for temporary flight restrictions on Airmap. We've checked for our state regulations with the state parks, where we can and cannot take off and where the boundaries are. We've checked the local ordinances and regulations of where we can control our remote from, where we can take off and land. And of course, while we're doing this, we are going to follow the FAA regulations and rules that keep us and everybody around us safe. We're going to still not fly above the 400 feet. We're not going to fly over people. We're not going to harass any wildlife. Of course, all the things that we normally would do as a responsible drone owner. That is how I would approach anywhere that you're unfamiliar with, even if you're familiar with it, even if it's a home area. Start with your federal, your FAA, controlled airspace, then go to your state level, then go to your local level, do your research. Contact the county personnel. Contact your state parks if you're not sure. Contact national parks if you're not sure. And even if you're on the ground and you see somebody, walk up, introduce yourself. You are a responsible drone pilot. And just say, hey, I plan on taking some footage over here. Just making sure you don't have any problems with that. I'd be happy to take your suggestions if you have, maybe you want to stay over in this area because people walk, what have you. You always just want to be a good neighbor when you're flying your drone as well. You don't want to be that drone guy that ends up on the national news, right? So that's all I have for you today. I hope it was useful to you and you found some interesting information that you didn't have before you watched the video. And if so, consider hitting the like button. I always appreciate it. It lets me know that something that I was doing was useful to you. With that, I do want your comments. Let me know down below, have you had any areas where you've had hassles or you've done your research and somebody has still given you a hard time? Or was this useful to you? Have you done your own research and found something similar? I just want to know. Let's start a conversation for the community so that we can all learn from it. So comment below. I always do appreciate that. And if you have any questions, of course, let me know those as well. I'll be happy to answer them if I can. Hey, you're still here. That's awesome. Since you're still here, I'm going to give you one piece of advice that was given to me a while ago by a fellow drone user. And that advice is, fly it like you stole it. Now, while this is not a recommendation to be a wild man when you fly your drone, it does have some validity. Now, hear me out. So what this fly it like you stole it mentality means is when you're ready to fly an area, get some great footage, whatever you're going to do, research that area, figure out what you're going to do first without your drone. And when you show up, make sure your batteries are charged, all your equipment is ready. You unpack, you go to a little bit less populated area, take that drone out, do what you've got to do, exhaust a couple of batteries, get your footage, and move on. If you're going to need to get some more batteries charged up, don't sit there in the middle of everybody and be a spectacle. Take your batteries someplace else, charge them up in your car, whatever. And don't sit in the same area for 6 hours fiddling with your drone, because there is going to be somebody that's going to be a jerk. They're out there. They're going to say, you know what, I don't like drones. They're noisy. You're spying on me. They're going to hurt me. Whatever. There is people that don't like anything. If you give me one hobby, I don't care what it is, somebody's going to say they don't like it for some reason and just try to make your life hell. So it's not worth it. So flying it like you stole it really is good advice in that you go in, you get what you need to, and you get out so that you just avoid some conflict that is likely going to happen at some point in time while you're flying your drone. So with that, I do appreciate you being here this long, and until next time, good flying.